Okay, you may begin.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today is Tuesday, October 15th, 2024, and this is PACO's October General Membership Meeting. Joining us today is Michael Kenny. Michael is a veteran private investigator who has consulted and investigated hundreds of stalking cases all over the country throughout his career. While still active in this fast paced environment, he's been featured on major TV networks, and his cases have appeared on critically acclaimed national television shows, including Dateline, 2020, 48 Hours, and more. Was also a presenter for 3 years at CrimeCon, the world's #1 true crime event, and was featured as one of the major investigators on the #1 true crime podcast, culpable. He also, and forgive me if for making the shameless plug for you, he also is the author of Think Like a Stalker and Stop Them. I did purchase that book. I've not yet read it, but I am looking forward to that. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. And you can tell I did not write that bio because it would have been two sentences. So I appreciate you reading it. I've done a lot of cold cases over the years, but I'm an ex-insurance adjuster that turned PI. So I have a little different background in my journey of how I got here. So it's a lot of fun. So I did a slide. I know they're going to email it out. It's just a simple slide to kind of keep us moving. And throughout this, if anyone has a question, feel free to ask, or if you're stuck on something and your job, I'd be glad to help. My office is in Columbus, Ohio now, and that's partially because as my parents got older, I wanted to be closer. So I've moved up this way and growing our firm in this capacity. So the first thing I had on our list is it's called Nice and Dumb. And when you are interviewing people in your role, I have found a very effective avenue is to just be nice and dumb. And I jokingly said before we started, I'll try not to be funny throughout this, but I have found that humor works a lot when you're interviewing people and you're trying to acquire information. Now, there's the time to be the heavy hand and go in and say, I need this by the facts. But very often, by just being nice and dumb, you get a lot more information. And people generally want to help. So when you call someone and you're open and you're not like, hey, I need these facts, ABC, just get to know them a little bit. And then if you remember the old show Columbo, he was always this way where he needed help. And it really does go a long way. And if you're talking about a particular case, okay, can you walk me through this? And just be nice at all times because they will follow up later with emails. And if it's okay if I tell some stories along the way on how this has been beneficial, is that okay with you all?
That's fine.
Okay. So many times, like, people, I do a lot of surveillance. That's what I love. I love going in your neighborhood and sitting there and not being recognized as doing surveillance. And so very often, people will tell you, oh, you'd never be able to sit in my neighborhood and watch me, which is hilarious to me because of course we can. And being nice and dumb goes a long way. So for me, I like to pull in and instead of being the creepy guy sitting in a vehicle on the street, a lot of times I'll get out and talk to neighbors and I'll say, hey, I'm interested in this foreclosure or my partners and I are buying this property and just to get them talking. And I go as far sometimes as if someone older is like taking, say, Christmas lights down, then I might say, hey, do you need a hand? I'm just waiting. I'll be out here for about another hour. And they're happy to get some help generally because I don't look threatening. I look like an accountant, most people say. So I try to help them. And then in that hour or two that I'm helping, they'll tell me things that you would just, be up. It would upset the person to know that their neighbor's telling us all this stuff in an investigation. And so just by being present, and a lot of times, like if and I don't know where anybody lives, but maybe your neighborhood doesn't have anyone parking on the street so that anybody parked on the street stands out completely. So by talking and being nice and dumb, somebody might say, well, hey, just pull into our driveway and sit here. And when we're doing these type of investigations, we always tell about 90% of the truth. So that if we come back 2 years later and they ask us, I'll say, yes, I'm married. I have 4 children. I keep it all in the same lane so I can keep that story going. Because a lot of times, as you know, law firms will say, great job. Now go watch them 6 months later. And if you don't remember what you told them, it can certainly be a problem. but asking for assistance and just being simple, Forrest Gump simple. Like, how do I get out of your neighborhood? I was just back here, my GPS and my phone died, and people just want to help, and they'll often open up anything they can to assist you and give you phone numbers or whatever the case. And then when I interview, and I always say this, and I have the cheat sheet right here, but interviews, a lot of people I think complicate interviews. Interviews are just a simple interaction like this. And if I may pull somebody out, and Lori, I'll just use you. So if I call and I say, hey, I want to talk about this case, you're going to clam up pretty quick. You're going to be like, oh, I want to make sure all the facts are right. But if you realize that it's just like an interaction, that you're just talking to people and you're just being nice, they'll tell you twice as much sometimes. And when we do stalker cases, a lot of times the stalker and specifically could be very dangerous. So I go in usually just joking and being nice, and I'm really just trying to assess the threat situation. You'll hear me say crazy is forever. I believe that crazy is forever, and you'll deal with people that are crazy and they'll always be crazy, and they're crazy today and they'll be crazy next week. And in the stalker world, that can be a serious situation of your safety. So Lori, what I'm saying is, like, if I were to call and interview you and just be nice, and one of the things I say here is starting with a common question, and then I'll tell you a story how this worked. I like asking about things in your area, and the example I used on the slide is, hey, what's the best? I'm coming up to Akron. What's the best Italian restaurant up there? And it's really great if they're Italian, because they're going to tell you that their mom made better sauce and that the Italian restaurant in town is not as good, but try this one. But it's just like it's a diversion. They're so serious, and it kind of takes them off the center of thinking too much about what you're there to acquire. And I'll give you an example. So we had a case where there were two safety switches for this company, and somehow it takes two people to push the buttons, and one guy was able to push both buttons, and then he hurt himself. And they hired us to figure out how he did it, and no one would say anything because a lot of them did it. And so on each interview, we interviewed about 18 people. On each interview, we'd say, hey, I know this is a serious situation, but do you mind if I ask you, who are you for this week's game doing XYZ or stuff? And we were just asking common questions. And I would talk to them for about 3 or 4 minutes before we got started. And I just watched them melt away from being stringent. I'm a big body language guy. So, if your arms are crossed and you're blocking somebody out, now they're looser and they're talking. And in the end of it, about the 17th guy, we were trying to act like we knew more than we did. And he just said, well, yeah, the broomstick. And we're like, what broomstick? And they had a broomstick that one of them were able to stand and then reach around the corner. And the reason they did it is they got overtime if they worked harder and faster. So they would use this broomstick, a cut-off broomstick, to stick it around the corner and press the other button. And that's how it dragged him and his shirt through the machine and injured him. But I would have never gotten that, in my opinion, had I not just got that rapport going. So rapport is very important when you're just trying to get information. And in the case of surveillance, if we're out there and I want to know if Joe is still in this apartment complex, then I have to find creative ways to not just ask if Joe's in the apartment complex. And I'll bring that up in a second on my second one about how some of the tactics that we use, but just generally blending in in the conversation. And, last week, Vanderbilt beat Alabama. And I'm sure you're all giant football fans, but that was a big deal. Vanderbilt tore their goalpost down and dragged it down Broadway in Nashville. And just like if the Buckeyes won, how, people flip cars over and stuff. But if you're trying to get to the bottom of it and you build a rapport with people, they'll tell you a lot more and give you more insight. As if you're sharing that story as commonality. Can you believe the Buckeye fans flipped this over? Then they're laughing and they're like, I can't believe it. That's crazy. But that commonality will give people, it'll open them up and tell you a lot more information. Any questions so far? If I'm boring you to tears, just raise your hand. I will not. It's okay.
You're doing fine. We're having a good time.
I try to have a good time. The other thing I always often mention, and only because I've read a lot of you guys, I know when you're involved with depositions and stuff, but written versus spoken always cracks me up. So if I were to say, Lori, I could just kill you for saying that. It sounds one way to say it, but when you read it, it just literally says, Lori, I could kill you for saying that. It sounds like I threatened you. So I always just tell people when you're doing any kind of interview or talking, just be cognizant of what you're saying, because in writing it can look really horrible. And I have a lot of depositions I've read and I've laughed out loud. I'm like, I'm quite sure that's not the lane they were speaking in. Do you all have any cases on an interview or somebody that won't talk to you? You guys are impressive, because usually there's somebody that has something where a person won't answer the phone, and that's another one. If you ever have somebody that won't answer the phone, two things that we do is you can do things like spoof card. I'm sure if you're aware of those or not, where you can put any number you want on their caller ID, but it's really not that complicated. If you just stop by the local hospital and say, can I use your phone, and call them, they'll generally answer. And if you, like one that we did last weekend, the lady worked at a learning center. And so yesterday, we just stopped by the learning center and said, hey, can we use your phone? And called the guy. And then of course he answered, and then we were able to get the papers and everything to him. Didn't make him happy. Those papers never make anybody happy. Well, I'll move on to my second thing then. And I joke about this a lot because it really is beneficial when you're trying to get to somebody or get information. This person, I'll just use this. I'm a Whataburger fan, so forgive my pen, but this person knows to lie. And they know they've told their mom and dad to lie. They've told their friends, their kids. They've told everyone, lie and cover for me. But for some reason, I always call it the grandparent rule. They haven't told their grandparents to lie. And so in these kind of cases, you want to find the grandparent. You want to find somebody that doesn't know to lie. And so very often, and I'll give you an example with the gentleman that worked on a roof by himself and he fell off allegedly and hurt himself. And it was a big lawsuit. And we spoke to him. This is what happened. His wife, this is what happened. Friends, everybody. But the grandparents, the grandma's like, do you mean his motorcycle accident? Of course, we're like, say that again. So once we went and pulled that, then he had a lot to obviously explain. And his injuries didn't really add up in the first place. But with the motorcycle, with the scrapes and stuff that he had, yeah, that was a good one. And then we went back and said, and of course I had the police report and everything. And I'm like, what about this? And he's like, that was separate. And I'm like, well, that was the day before you fell off the roof where no one was there. So he finally admitted it in the end. So anytime you can find that outlier, that person that doesn't know to lie for your case or whatever you're pulling in information, it's just so great because they'll tell you more than they knew to tell you, and they'll share things with you never imagined that they would share. And in this case, with the motorcycle accident, I was like, I heard about that. Where was that? And it was in 2 counties over. So we would have never likely gone 2 counties over for that one to look. But people go to great lengths to conceal whatever they're lying about. And so your job, right, when you're trying to get to the bottom is to find the truth. Is anybody struggling with one right now to find the truth on? Did everybody eat a giant lunch and they're all asleep? And that's okay.
Yeah, but it just feels like you won when you get there. It just feels so valuable.
It does. I mean, you want to celebrate with somebody, and sometimes you want to celebrate with the person you're with, but they're the problem, so you can't do that. So that could be difficult. The other thing too.
Oh, Michael, we do have a question.
Yeah, sorry.
That's Linda?
I think that's me. I have one where I have one person that's telling me one thing. I do internal investigations for EEOC charges. And I have one where one person is telling me one thing, and the other person who I know and has done a phenomenal job of documentation is telling me another. And it happens to be a description about a person, and they vary so widely. So I was like, something's not right. And we found out she keeps changing her story because she doesn't want to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. So that's been a little bit of a trick for me. I've never run across it having it vary so widely on one single investigation. I've been doing the investigations for like 2.5 years now, and this is the first one I've encountered that the descriptions are totally different.
And you just want to grab them and shake them, right? And say, tell me the
Yes.
truth. So,
Yes.
Well, I did a memory class one time, and I was amazed how terrible our memories are. So a lot of times with witnesses, they will say different things, but a lot of times if you have them write it out and then tell the story backward, because people can lie forward, but they can't lie backwards. And so a lot of times when we sit down and they're just that different, we'll say, well, take me from the end to the beginning.
Mhm.
And through that process, it is really hard for them to keep those facts straight. The person telling the truth is generally, they'll think about it, but they can walk you back up the steps. But the person lying, you're going to just see it. They're going to be like, because they're trying to piece the puzzle together to tell that piece. So that's been very beneficial to me. It's hard to lie
That's
backwards.
that's great. I'm going to use that one. Thank you.
By the way, my email is on any of this, and you'll find if we were just hanging out that I just really want to help people. So if
Mhm.
there's something you have a question or any way I can help you, even if it's personal, if you're like, I want to find somebody that I haven't found, let me know. I'd
Mhm.
be glad to help, and my email will be on that form that goes out.
I'm going to put it in the chat as well.
Thanks. And we talked a little bit in the beginning. I don't know if many of you were on, but like one of my surveillance vehicles is a van with an office in it. And for surveillance, I like cars and trucks that no one looks for.
Mhm.
Not a dark SUV, not a van with dark windows, but the particular van we have is like a construction van, and it has a full office in the back with Xbox and DVD. Oh, I don't have DVDs anymore, but it has it. And but I really love to go back there and do surveillance sometimes because you can do many things and you can sit out there for hours and it's got snacks and water and everything. And if you're ever bored, I'll bring it somewhere in Columbus and show it to you. If you're somewhere outlying, email me, and if I do a case up that way, I'd love you to see it because it's just so much fun. But it's got a little office and it completely blacks out. It's very, very beneficial. The other thing we use for surveillance is construction trucks. And I always love when someone says, we did construction, it was 12 degrees. How do you do it? And I'm like, well, what do construction trucks do? They run the entire time they're sitting there. So, and when people come up and confront you and say, what are you doing? Back to nice and dumb. I'm like, listen, my boss told me to sit here. And last time I moved, he threatened to fire me, and I really need this job. I'm really sorry. But is it okay if I sit here? And generally, people will say yes, unless it's a drug house. So then that's another scenario. But yeah, they'll generally be nice and let you sit there. And I'll tell you, a surveillance I did that just did it. And this is the kind of stuff that I say. And I try not to laugh when I say it, I'll be honest. But so we had a gentleman that works on cars, but where he lived was really difficult. So I got a bunch of video, but no one parked on the street. So I had to stop at a stop sign. And I was there about 25 minutes filming. And finally, the neighbor came out and they walked up and they knocked on the window. And you can't see our camera in case you're wondering if I'm standing there with a big zoom. But he goes, can I help you? Because I'm sitting at a stop sign telling people to go around me. And I go, yeah, I work for Amazon. We do quality control. I'm just making sure our trucks are coming. He went on to tell me about how he didn't get this package. And I said, well, I'll fill a ticket out for it. So while the camera's filming, I bet I have 20 minutes of him telling me why he didn't get his package. And just because I thought it was funny, I'm like, well, what did you order? And it was like some basking thing that he cooked out with that you could buy at Walmart. But anyway, those are the things that I get great humor out of when I do surveillance. One of the other things too, I talk about these backdoor questions, back to what we were saying. So a lot of times if you ask a question, you're going to hear no, but if you ask it backward, and I don't mean in reverse, but I'll give you an example. We had a guy, we got hired to find a gentleman. He was a Hispanic guy with 4 last names. And so he was from San Antonio, Texas, moved up, and we desperately were trying to serve him from his own law firm. I'm sure some of you deal with that where you lose your own witnesses. And so you hire us as PIs to go out and find your witness. And that's what we were doing. And he would never answer the door. And I wasn't sure if he lived there or not. So as you know, if I call an apartment complex and I say, does Lori live at this apartment complex? They're going to tell me they can't tell me that, right? Every time. But if I call and say, hey, listen, I'm a delivery guy. I've been there 3 times. No one answers the door. Can I just drop it off with you? You want to hit that part of their brain where they're not thinking. And they're either going to say, no, that person moved, or yeah, that's fine. Bring it by, thus confirming they live there. So it's those backdoor questions that are so good in these cases because they don't know they're telling you information. And anytime you can gather something where they don't know, it's going to be truthful off the time and you'll get a lot more information. So, and I'm trying to watch the time too and be, because I want to leave in. Any questions about that or the grandparent effect, as I call it? Are there any country fans on here? I can only see a few. So. Country music fans? Any of you hate country music? Is there any in between? I started my firm on Music Row in Nashville, so we've worked with a lot of the country stars. And so it's funny because there's not a lot of in between. They love them or they hate them, and it's really kind of comical. And it's funny, the stuff they deal with that ends up in songs later that you can't talk about because we sign NDAs, but it's really humorous later when you hear a song and you're like, oh yeah, that's pretty funny because the songwriters are a riot. And if you've not been to Nashville, I highly recommend you go down when I'm down there sometime. I'd love to give you a walking tour, and I mean that because I love it, the history of it, and all the way back to Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash and all those folks. So if you make it down, I would really, truly love to show you around. Although these days I'm spending most of my time in Columbus. And if you're in an outlying area of Columbus and you just want to sit down and talk, again, email me. I'd love to get together. If we want to jump on a little bit to social media, is this something in your, you find this valuable, I hope, on social media? You're always looking. I don't know when you, a lot of times when I talk to other investigators and we're going down the social media road, I'm always like, he's 21. Why are you looking at Facebook? Like, sure, he could have a Facebook account. He's probably on TikTok, and TikTok has been, it's like when social media first came out and we were like, everyone's telling us what they're doing. Like, it was amazing because I had done surveillance and finding people long before social media. But this generation now, and we just did a case on a 21-year-old guy that was in a car wreck, that I was like, it was like having a psychic next to me telling everything. He put everything on TikTok. There was just nothing left to ask. We just kept screen recording all his TikToks. But and Shafi, I know you're on here. I don't know if I had the dog case when we worked together last time. Do you recall if I was looking for the missing dog? Not something, I'm not a pet detective.
I don't remember that.
So this, they're very happy. There's a happy ending, so don't think there's not. But as of Saturday, so there's a lady that had a service dog, and she had a situation, and she had to turn to the person next to her, and that person turns out to be a very bad drug addict. And she's like, can you take my dog? I'm going to go to the hospital, and then I'll come back in a couple days and get the dog. Well, she never saw the dog again, and the drug addict lady completely disappeared. And so for, oh my gosh, like 5 or 6 months, we are always 2 weeks behind her. We show up in an apartment complex, like she just moved, but never any indication of the dog. And long story short, I was talking to one of the neighbors, and again, back to nice and dumb. I was just being dumb. And they go, yeah, the only thing I know about her is when I follow her on TikTok. And I'm like, oh, that would be hilarious. What's her TikTok? And then when I got the handle for her TikTok, I don't know where the logic was, but we would probably not have found it as quickly as them telling us. So once we had the TikTok, we went in and started watching every video, and she had videos of her driving, so we knew the general area. But long story short, on Saturday morning, she posted, and I have glasses on, you can see reflection. She posted about 5 photos, and one of the photos, it was clearly she was working at a mall. One of them, the reflection showed an outside door, so we knew that it was an outlet mall or something. Could be Easton, but it ended up being the outlet mall. And as I kept digging in, like, okay, now we finally have a lead because she's always on the go. I went to the outlet mall, and I'm walking around, and finally I matched the background of her pictures with the store, and went in and I recorded her, and I was joking around with her, because we need a server. I didn't have the papers because another process server. I'm just trying to find them. And so long story short, I asked her questions that she, generally people would go like, why are you asking me that? But she kept telling me. And we wanted to know how many kids she had, because that would line up with her visitation on another angle we were looking at. And I told her I had 4 kids. She goes, I have 5 kids. And I almost was like, 5 kids, great. And then she would tell me something else, and I wanted to know the area she lived in. So I told her I had just moved into the same area, and I'm just waiting. And she's like, yeah, that's where I live. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Have you been to this place? And I didn't ask her where she lived, but it narrowed it down greatly to where she lived. So TikTok was a big hit just this past weekend on that one. And I go back to consider the age, Instagram, they're all different, even though we all have them all, depending on what you're looking for. And Facebook seems to be a lot better for an older group. And I'm on Facebook. I just don't look at it very often. And I've got about 60 fake Facebook accounts, but fake ones. So that's always good. But know your demographic when you're looking for the social media. And it can be tricky when you want to make sure you're on the right person. Anybody have a question about that, to make sure you have the right person?
Yeah. How do you make sure you have the right person, Michael?
Well, you can use some AI software and stuff to get pictures. And what I love is you have, and I'll use this, here's Joe, and Joe isn't posting anything, but maybe his wife is, maybe his kids are. And I did a case a few years ago, and it's one of my all-time favorites. If you ever come to a seminar I'm doing, I generally show this video. But the lady claimed everything under the stars. And one of her things is she couldn't stand. And so one afternoon, we're monitoring her all the time, and her son's Instagram pops up, and there's Our Lady laughing, turning, and bowling. You know how you go up on one leg if you bowl? And the video was only up about maybe 5 minutes, but we were able to grab it. And boy, that toasted her. But it was one of those things that she had gone to such great lengths, but she never thought about her son, recording and posting it like that. I'm sure she told him 100 times, knowing in the end. But always broaden your net on the social media, because could be somebody that could easily have the answer you're looking for or the picture. And we had a classic car we were trying to find that was stolen, and we knew who did it, but we couldn't figure it out. And long story short, we finally got a picture where somebody in the background had the car, and we were able to track it down that way. And more importantly, I had another one where the guy really didn't do anything. In his deposition, he said, "I don't go anywhere, I don't do anything." And so I love doing the deep dive social media stuff. If you see me at Starbucks, that's generally what I'm doing. I get in a zone and I go down every rabbit hole. But I found where his cousin, they would rent a house in Ocean City, Maryland for vacation every year around the 4th of July. So long story short, we dug in. There was a very colorful water tank, and we used that to pinpoint the area. And then putting other pictures together, we figured out the condo. And then we called, and the condo was more of an Airbnb, like they owned it, the cousin did, and they rented it, but other people did. And we were able to call and spiel them out of more information that the family needed it every year on the 4th of July weekend or week. So we sent surveillance up there. And I mean, we got this guy cannonballing in the pool and running, and he just thought he was so off the radar. And sometimes on surveillance, if you don't follow them to the location, so if you ever have your investigator say, instead of picking them up and follow them, do you mind if you supply the appointment? Because they might leave somewhere that has 50 turns and stop signs. And if you just pick them up at the appointment, then you have the ability just to slide out of there right after them and off their radar. And being off the radar, as you know, for surveillance is important. Any other questions on social media before I move on to this next little tidbit of social media? And if this is really lame and boring, you can tell me that too, and I'll change gears for you. So that's fine.
No, what about the ones I put Snapchat in the in the chat
Snapchat's
there?
great to
So
give locations.
yeah, and I know they disappear, right? After a while.
Yeah, but some of you not necessarily, and they'll tell you if you screenshot and all that, but there's ways around that. That's too long of a conversation for here. But yeah, I love Snapchat. And there was a convicted guy that no one could find in Snapchat. There was this location, and we were like, no way. Of course, we ran over there, and then we tailed him to the Motel 6 where he was living, and the rest was history. So yeah, Snapchat's good. I don't see the kids using Snapchat as much, but it seems that TikTok's so good about learning whoever's watching. I know, like on my real TikTok account, like anything I do, it like just gives me more and more and more. It feeds me all the things that I like. It's going to just overload me with it. Yeah, but great. And on my list, I don't have Snapchat, but I am amazed. But this is something else too. Do you guys, and anyone can answer, when you do background checks and stuff, what platforms are you using? Are you using TLO or IDI or something else? Nexus Lexus?
Use Maltego.
Okay.
Yep.
So one of the questions we get asked a lot is, we know everything about them, but we can't find their social media. And so often, you'll get people that there'll be like 27 email addresses. Like that's all they did for a year was create emails. But if you look, sometimes it'll have like Lori779, and that'll be a handle somewhere. And I'm always amazed that handle might go all the way back to MySpace, but there'll be some commonality on MySpace, or like there was one we did with a family photo off MySpace, and then we drop it into 10i or Google Images or some other stuff we have with AI that'll then match that picture to the new social media profile. And so they might have a squirrely name that you wouldn't figure out, but because of that old picture, it matches to the new profile, and then we're off and running. And those are good ones. It's so great when they think that everything's invisible and you can't figure it out. And the whole time you're in there, you have access to everything. It works out so good. But when you're doing social media, always expand out to family members and kids and different platforms. just like if you're doing searches, don't just use Google, use Yahoo and DuckDuckGo and all the others, just because some of them have slightly different algorithms that can pop something that you weren't counting on. And then always do those searches as well in parentheses on their names, because sometimes it'll pop something just random out. And there was a particular person using the wrong birth date, but it popped out a different social media account that was before they were lying, and it gave us their actual birth date. They had used the derivatives of their name, which is always just so frustrating. So searching by the username can go a long way, and using their email list can be just such a great avenue to figure out some of those handles. Any other?
Michael, we do have a question.
Yeah.
I'm not certain exactly what she means, and maybe we'll need Kim to give a little bit more context. Her question is, how do you handle pseudonyms on social media?
Well, we use some behind the scenes trickery to figure out some of this stuff. And again, we go through their family members, and we're matching pictures that way, because a lot of them do that. And a lot of time we have some behind the scenes stuff. I said we can do an email that'll pop a lot of stuff on what they're using. But again, the any kind of picture, when you're searching by picture, will pop out. Any effort they've gone to conceal can be good. If it's a lockdown account, that's another story. But social media in general, and it's funny because sometimes, and this sounds so backward, but sometimes when you need somebody's social media and you ask them for it, and I'll give you an example. We knew that this person had a lot of stuff. We had no idea. We were 50-50 if they had social media, but we got behind them in line at coffee and struck up a conversation. And again, I play nice and dumb, and I'm nice and I joke. And then the person gave me their handle. They're like, oh yeah, I did it here. And I'm like, oh, great. And it was one of those things that was so out there that you would never guess it. And then once we had that, then we were able to backdoor so much, but they weren't posting pictures of themselves. It was more about, taking cruises, that kind of stuff, which I liked very much because I like to cruise. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other? So I really, when I do seminars and stuff, I always talk about being nice and dumb because it goes so far, and I talk about the grandparent effect because people tell you things that they wouldn't. And social media is something we use on and I'm sure if you're not doing social media right off the bat on your cases, a lot of your questions may be answered immediately by what they're posting. So I always recommend jumping into that. So I did a case 2 years ago. It's on HBO. I think it comes out next month. I joked before we got on, it'll probably be the back of my head that you see because I say I have a face made for podcasting. But I want to encourage you guys, like anything that you can get your cases. I've done a lot of cold cases, and it started back for me when a friend of mine, I have my best friend's a female PI, and she did a lot of cold cases long before I looked at them. And she said, you think differently, which is true. I'm not ex-law enforcement. I was a claims adjuster. We hired private investigators, and I kept saying, like, will you give us this and not give us this? And no. So I just was like, well, maybe we should start something down the middle. So 25 years ago, I started my firm and just kind of gave what the adjusters needed. And then as it kind of expanded out of that, I got asked to do this or that. The way that we started working with celebrities is a really silly story. Because we have time, I'll tell it. My public license in Tennessee had my home address, which they required back then. And when they built my neighborhood, all the houses came together, and my house didn't have an address, and there were like possible of 5 addresses. And a guy came looking for me one day, and I didn't like that. So a friend of mine owned a building on Music Row and said, get your mail here. So I sent my mail there once a week. I'd go. And it was as silly as somebody going, what do you do? I'm a private investigator. Oh, you should work with so-and-so. They have this or that. And that led me into the stalker world where they needed help. And the problem too, one of the biggest problems in Ohio and everywhere on stalking is they're not charging them with stalking. They're charging them with something else. So, and I don't want to call anybody out. Is there anybody that's single that does a search before they go out and date somebody, is willing to talk about it? If not, that's okay. But anybody on here?
I definitely would.
So generally, you probably do a Google search of some kind, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
But I do it to people we meet. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
so
just to make sure they're
not a
Randy
serial
did.
killer or right. But the
Randy
stalker
did.
stuff, so often it'll say harassment. And the problem with stalking is, like, if I were stalking you and we went to and the police pull me in and I'm just a normal, nice guy, they're going to let me go every day of the week. It's just not going to stick. And so I often talk about it. And the reason I wrote my book was because so many people needed help. And I want to show you a couple of features of the book since you bought it and didn't read it yet. It's a $10 book. This is the book, my shameless plug. It doesn't have anything on the bind. That was so that someone could stick it into their purse quickly or on a shelf, and no one, if you have somebody abusive, you didn't want them to see. And as far as like, I put things in the book because we gave them to shelters and stuff, that people that needed help. And by the way, I've helped some women's shelters where, when you go to women's shelter, you're supposed to be invisible and they can't find you. And one of the things I do in my firm is we breach people's security to help them make it better. And I'll tell you one in a second that I just did that everyone's upset but happy about breaching their security. So we put misspellings and some things in the book so that if you gave it to somebody and you have a stalker, how can we help you? Did you read the book? And they're like, oh yeah, I read it. Well, sure you did, because you would have noticed that there's some things in there that shouldn't be. So it's small. We made it $10 so that anybody could get it and give it to somebody. And this was a passion of mine just because it's so underserved. There's so many people dealing with stalkers. And, I had some good things. I had Fox pick it up and Court TV and some things. And that was good to get the right exposure. But, I have a passion for trying to help people, kind of like what I said earlier. Does anybody know anybody dealing with a stalker? You had that? If not, that's great.
Yeah, just what I've seen on the true crime shows.
Yeah. Well, the true crime shows are funny. I get asked a lot of those questions. What's it like doing the shows? Well, it's like this. You spend 3 days with the correspondent educating them, and then you get edited out as they ask you to walk from the library to the courthouse. They're walking, and then they tell the story. And so it's kind of funny we did Crime Watch Daily one time on one, and I still laugh about this. Like, hey, Michael, come here. Do you mind standing behind the camera? In other words, off camera, like you don't. Yeah, it was just funny. And I stood there, and I think the back of my head was on that one. But one of those cases. Do you want to talk about cold cases just for a second?
Sure.
You guys had also. We did a case on a guy named Christian Andriacchio, and Christian allegedly shot himself in the head. And then after he shot himself in the head, he decocked the gun and changed hands. Not possible, right? But it was ruled a suicide by the police, which later the police chief resided in the same apartment complex that shut it down. It's a suicide. So, these families, they're a victim twice. You lose your loved one, and then it just seems like justice never comes. And it's so hard and expensive to get the attention. And when we're lucky enough to call in a favor or get something to where we're able to get it to a broader audience or to TV or in some capacity, it opens, for a short time, it opens the doors. So I don't know. I feel mixed on how things should be handled with those things, but there's a lot of cold cases out there, and I'm sure if you know anybody dealing with one, it's just the worst thing I've ever seen. And you find yourself in our role becoming kind of part of the family, and you care. And some of the police departments, and I'm no way knocking them, but like if you have a file and you hand it to the next desk, and a month later you hand it to the next, no one does. The first round they did so much good information, but now they've got a bunch of more cold cases, and now a tremendous amount more in that pile goes. So they're never able to dig into the level that the original people did. And I think that's part of why I go. And then some departments, it hurts their numbers to have those outstanding unsolved cases, so they don't pursue them. That's just a cold reality. If you do know somebody dealing with a stalker, I'll go back. I want to mention that tell them to stop all contact. That's the number one thing. Sometimes they just keep going with them and don't stop all contact. And I always use this example. If the person calls you 550 times and you answer on the 551st time, they now know it takes 551 times to get you on the phone. And in the case of celebrity, you could get on an elevator and somebody looks at you and they're like, oh, you're my soulmate and we're supposed to be together. And you can't get rid of them. And we're dealing with a lot of those. And because we did music, it expanded out to some of the actors and some of the stuff they deal with. You know, people fall in love with a role that they played, and now they're pursuing them like, you know, like they were in the Notebook. The other thing is don't delete any evidence. You're going to have to do a lot of the work yourself on the stalker case. You're going to have to do the police their job very often because, again, if the stalker is just a normal looking Joe that comes in, they're going to let him go. And then the key is to get the laws changed so that it says stalker, because back to what we said, if you're Googling that person you have a date with and it comes up stalker, right? I'm hoping you're not going to go on the date, right? You're going to pass on that one. So, but I'm amazed. I did a case where a guy, one of my friends, I won't say his name. I want to, even though you don't know him, but he, you know, get his name out there. But he asked me, he said, my grandmother's dating a guy that's a real problem. And when we pulled all the records, the guy had horrible things, including knife point abduction and assault and all this. And he goes, well, coming from you, she'll really respect it. So I went and spoke to her and she's like, I don't care. I'm in love. And I was like, okay. So you know you can't fix that. One of my favorite stalker cases, and only because I learned, and I thought this was brilliant. So if you ever have somebody that just you cannot find, so this particular celebrity had a gal that he really liked because she was younger and you know, I don't know, they're doing their thing, and he broke up with her, and then he was trying to serve her papers because she stole money and all these things. And of course, I was hired, go find her, and we're going to serve her. We're going to get her. And I couldn't find her to save my life. I mean, every time we get close, she was gone. So she got a job at his favorite airline. He shows up to fly one day, and they rekindle, and they're back in love, and they're together, and he's forgotten everything that happened. And I go over one day, and I don't know this, and I get to talk to her. And she doesn't know that I'm the one that pursued her, but I got to ask her all these questions, which we never do. And the way she evaded us is she would sit in the parking lot of like a Days Inn, and she would wait till a business person came out and left at 8 a.m. and she'd wait till the cleaning person came, and they walk up and go, hey, I'm not done in the room yet. Can I get in real quick? I don't have my key. And they go, yeah. She'd go in, she'd take a shower, she'd go get breakfast, she'd sleep, take a nap. And then the next day she'd do it somewhere else. She never showed up on the radar anywhere. And then of course, what he asked me, you know, what do you think how this is going to go? And I go, I hope she doesn't kill you, because she was such a problem. But they broke up again, and it was terrible. And she did twice the damage the second time, and they're not together now. So I often say too, regarding stalkers, that the police don't wear bulletproof vests. Would anybody like to guess why I say that?
Just encourages them to go for the headshot.
They're peace officers.
Dark. I like that answer. No, I always say the police don't wear bulletproof vests because it would offer no protection. And so often in the stalker cases or harassment, they're just trying to get to the restraining order. And they think if I have that restraining order, that's the end all, I've got it made. And it's not. There's plenty of dead people with a restraining order in their pocket. So that's not the end game. You want to help build their case and get them in there. And I always say, tell your coworkers, tell your family members that you're getting harassed. And one of our cases, one thing that's really funny is we'll tell people a lot of times, if you're single and you have a stalker, I don't mean like it's hilarious funny, but just act like you're dating a police officer or a state agent or a trooper or somebody, and have all your social media pictures with them. And that amazingly has worked, that they're like, I don't really want to deal with pursuing him or her if they're dating somebody in that situation. One other thing in the book here, we sign NDAs. So some of the stories that we tell, I have to change a little bit. Instead of a guy, now it's a girl. Instead of a skating rink, it's a ballpark. And then I'll meet somebody that goes, hey, I read your book. Tell me more about that. And I'm like, oh yeah, we had to change that. And I had to be careful with the NDAs on how we pursue it, because it's really an education thing. And if somebody's hiding up behind your house in the dark in a shed up there and you don't know who's up there, just go install a camera. It'll fix that. So a lot of common sense stuff too. I hope I brought some value to you today. I don't know that I did. I'm really trying to know the lane you would like me in. If you have any questions later, email me. Anything you would like to know now, just shoot away. I'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, you had a scenario where you breached security, Michael.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Tell
Yeah.
us about that one.
Yeah, so I want you to picture a skyscraper, and I want you to picture that everyone has a little badge, and that they have the doors that you walk in. If anybody goes to Easton, I don't know, I'm sure you guys are all over the state, but they close immediately as soon as you go through. And so um, they had 8 checkpoints, and they asked me if I could get in, and I go, yeah, probably. And oh no, you'll never. We've got all this security, and I said, okay. And so the morning of, I had to do a brief with them, and I was asking questions like, they're like, go down to this hall, and they have government contracts. So I'm trying to, as security, I'm trying to be checking doors. Which, why would I be doing that? Right? It should stand out and cause alarm. And as I'm walking the morning of the call, I go, by the way, after the 3rd security point, it's not clear if I go left or down the stairs. They, oh, don't worry about it. You'll never get that far. Well, just humor me and tell me. So they gave me the information. And I was like, okay. So all the money, all the security people, the cameras, the equipment, the doors, the badges, and it took me 8 minutes to go through all 8 checkpoints. And I was supposed to get in their lobby, get on the elevator. And because I'm kind of a smart aleck, I went around to the front of security and took a selfie. And then I went and got on the elevator and went up. And their head of security watched this all unfold and was like, and their nighttime security passed me at one point. I'm trying a door in a secure hallway. And I go, hey, how you doing? And he's like, hey, going good. And I walk past him, and it goes back to social engineering. The day before, I went downtown, and most of the workers, the guy workers, had polo shirts, and the managers had a little different ideas, and they were dressed like I am now, more of a long sleeve. So that's how I dressed. And I'd open the door for you. You didn't realize you just keyed me in, but I'd open the door for you, and went in. So this is about a week and a half post that engagement. And half the people couldn't be happier, and half the people are shredded because they can't believe how easy it was. And at one point, I had to stand. 5 minutes of the 8 minutes was me having to stand under a camera to see if it would elicit their concern, and it didn't. And then I had to walk through an area that would set an alarm off, and it didn't. And it was mind blowing. So there's a lot of changes coming that way. But that's one of the things we love to do. Companies will hire us to get in. And our only concern, of course, is that we get dropped on our head, that somebody comes in and decides that we're a threat and throws us out the window or something. So, but social engineering is a scary thing that we all want to believe,
So it wasn't even somebody holding the door open for you because you were delivering a package or visiting someone.
Well, and I'll tell you, so one of their, right, I just walked up dressed similar to this and waited for somebody to open that door, and then somebody's walking in and they scan, and I open the door for them. And I'm supposed to have something here, and I'm supposed to have a badge, like a card hanging down. I have no credentials. I wasn't allowed to lie and say anything. I don't know. I'll tell you another one, just a quick one. We had one that was a plant, and I love when they go, well, there's no way you'll get in. I'm like, challenge accepted. But all I did was go to McDonald's and grab a bag of McDonald's. Like, this is scary. And I pulled up to their security shack, and I go, hey, DoorDash, I've got a delivery. And I just drove away. I didn't let it happen anything. And I drove all the way up past another security guard, past 2 trucks and a golf cart, went in, walked up, opened the front door, walked into the security desk and sat it on their table and said, hey, there's some free McDonald's. You're gonna want it later, or something, being funny. And then I left. And that was another one that upset them. But you do all that training. I don't know. So anyway, I like to think it's doing good.
And no DoorDash sticker on your car for that?
Nothing. I wasn't allowed. I wasn't allowed to have any kind of fake ID. I wasn't allowed to say I knew an employee. And the scary part now, I don't know about you guys. I had to get AirPods yesterday because mine got destroyed over the weekend. But Amazon's scary. You order and it's almost like knock, knock, knock. 30 seconds later, they're so quick. But think about who's delivering your Amazon packages. It's random people in cars maybe they have a vest on, maybe they don't. Some of those vests are at eBay. I've seen them in Goodwill. And I've even said something to a contact, because we've done surveillance and stuff for Amazon. Like, this stuff's out there. And their response was, well, please buy it so it's not out there. I'm like, okay, well, that's one way of doing it. So I don't know. I do have Uber and Lyft lights that I bought at some bargain hunt. If you have those anywhere near you, I bought one of those, and I'll put them out there sometimes when we're pulling up. And then people try to get in the car sometimes, even though we're not really Uber or it's kind of funny. It's a sign of the times, right?
So we had a case many years ago. It was a wrongful termination Well, there were a lot of different factors to this case, but we had hired an investigator and they did their preliminary background check and they found all kinds of priors for not only theft, but for violent crimes. The guy was a sweetheart. He was abusive to his spouse and his children. Liked to tell his wife that he was going to barricade she and the children in the house and set it on fire. And he was just a real sweetheart. And the investigator immediately called and said, this guy has a lot of serious violent episodes in the past. You do not want him on your property. You give his picture to everyone in every guard shack, every checkpoint, every doorway. Nobody lets him in because he's the guy that's going to come in and shoot the place up because he's ticked off. Do you see that a lot?
Yeah. Yeah. And I see that and I see him let him in. I see those scenarios where they walk right past them. And I see sometimes, there's one in particular that jumps in my brain where exactly your scenario, the person came up and they go, oh no, stop. And it was an insurance company. And the police time was like 28 minutes for them to get there. And he acted like he left, but he just went around and went in through their loading dock and went up and it became a terrible situation. But he did get in. And I'll tell you, I did a stalker case at CMA Fest one year and we had the picture of the guy. And this is more of a funny one, but he came walking up almost directly to me, dressed in exactly the same shirt, looking. I mean, I was like, did you just take this? And he got arrested on the spot. And then we had one at CMA Awards where this guy changed his look every time. And I'll give you some examples. He got up and helped Glenn Campbell get on stage, just out of the crowd, got backstage and hugged Taylor Swift back when she was country. And then Blake Shelton got up and was walking up and he got right behind him and walked almost up to stage 3 years in a row. We were hired the fourth year and we stopped it, but he looked completely different. I was questioning it, looking at him. Now his hair was blonde and guy was a good change. But if the person shows up, obviously every person at the door should immediately alert. And then the key is there, and this is one of the things we train, when he shows up, obviously if you don't have armed security or somebody that can handle it, and you call the police, then you want to have a reason to stall them and be nice. And that's where nice and dumb comes in again, where you would just keep them there. Like, oh yeah, man, did you see the game this weekend or whatever you can get them talking about to stall them enough to get them there, because likely they have something outstanding, right? And they can pick them up and get them out of her hair for a little while. But it is amazing how people can get some of the abuse things, they take them right back, or they lash out at us for trying to help.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I hope I'm answering everything. And I hope
Linda,
you
did
get
you have a
one
question,
sheet
Joe?
later. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think Linda had her hand up
Yeah.
earlier. Linda? Where'd you get it answered?
We have issues with piggybacking. I work for a large temporary staffing company.
That's
And we
exactly
have
what
issues
we do.
with piggybacking with the badges and stuff. One person lets everybody else in, and the corporation I worked at before had an incident with someone kind of going off the rails a little bit. So we all had badges and you had to scan your badge in, and because they didn't want people, open the door. One uses their badge and here I got it. And then here come people in that you don't know. And it's amazing how easy it is to get into a building like that to cause trouble. So your stories are fascinating.
Oh, thanks. But that's exactly right. And it's education. You have to tell all those, and there needs to be some repercussion. Like if you're caught letting somebody in, then XYZ happened. But you're right. But again, I always go back to nice and dumb. If I'm nice, you can get away with so much on, and if anybody would have asked me, I would have said, oh, I left it in my desk last night, or I would have whatever. I would have got in even if they asked me. But security was the big fault. They should have. I got stuck at one point where you had to key in and go to the next and key in it, and I was stuck because I had to get so close to the person. And the way I got through that one is I was joking about football, and when the guy came through and I was joking, I was walking with him, he scanned. I got so close to him to get through that little thing, but that I was like, yeah, he tackled him like this kind of thing was kind of my joke, and I got right through to the next level. And that's a problem, and part of that comes from reverse engineering with the stalking, like knowing how they think and how they bypass things. Like, people live in a gated community and they get right in and like the DoorDash, there's so many commonality things that we're just used to, or the car on your street that you don't know and you go out to confront it. And, I'm telling you, I'm with Amazon doing this. People just want to have a reason to discard you, like, oh, you're okay. And that's part of the biggest problem. And that's the social engineering. But I know we're up on time. If there's something I can do for any of you in Ohio, you have my email. I'd be happy to help you. If I didn't sound like it, I do love surveillance. I really do. Shafi and I did one. We had a blast, and we smoked that guy, didn't we, Shafi?
Yeah, that was you got some great footage of him.
We had a blast, and that guy lived in a house you probably wouldn't want to visit, and he was cooking food and selling it. And the presentation of the food looked okay, but if you saw with your kitchen, you would likely run. So, but it's a lot of fun. So again, if there's something I can help you, and even like I said, even if it's personal and you just, man, if I could just ask somebody that does this outside, my sister's dealing with something, just reach out because I'm open. And if I can help, I happily will.
Very good. Well, thank you, Michael, for your offer and for your sharing your expertise with us here today. It's been a fascinating discussion. I think everybody enjoyed it very much. We just may have to have you back sometime. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And as always, thank you to our friends at Veritext for providing today's video link and for videotaping and recording our session. This session should end up on the website in our video library in several weeks. So if you want to go back and rewatch, or if you missed it, you'll have a second chance. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Michael, for being here. Very much appreciate it. And everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think it's consensus. You're going to have to come back.